Somewhere in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a homeowner woke up to a soft, wet sound coming from directly above her bed. By the time she looked up, a section of her bedroom ceiling had already started to sag, bowing downward like a deflating balloon, just seconds before it gave way completely. What caused it wasn't a burst pipe, it wasn't a storm. It was a mistake made months earlier, hidden behind a perfectly painted, perfectly smooth ceiling, by someone who thought drywall was the easiest part of the entire build. If you've ever looked up at a ceiling and assumed it was the simplest, safest part of your home, you're about to see why that assumption is exactly what gets people hurt and expensive. Subscribe now, because every week we dig into the quiet construction mistakes hiding above and around you, the ones no inspector catches until it's already too late. Most people never think about their ceiling. It's just there, flat, white, forgettable. But a ceiling is one of the most physically demanding surfaces in an entire house. It has to fight gravity every single day, silently, for decades, while carrying the weight of insulation, drywall, sometimes even a second floor above it. And when it's installed wrong, gravity doesn't forgive. The story usually starts the same way. A contractor is racing against a deadline. Ceiling drywall takes longer to hang than wall drywall because every sheet has to be lifted overhead and held in place while it's fastened. So on a tight schedule, shortcuts start to feel tempting. A crew member grabs the wrong thickness of board. A panel goes up without enough screws. A joint doesn't get taped the way it should. None of it looks wrong. None of it feels wrong. Not yet. But here's where everything changed. Weeks later, the homeowners move in. They paint the ceiling. They hang a light fixture. Everything looks flawless. And that's exactly the danger, because drywall failure almost never announces itself early. It waits. To understand why, you have to understand what a ceiling is actually made of, and what it's fighting against every single day. Standard wall drywall is often half an inch thick, but ceilings are supposed to use a special type, usually 5/8 of an inch thick, and in many cases, a specific ceiling-rated board designed to resist sagging over time. It sounds like a small difference. It isn't. That extra thickness and that specific engineering is what keeps a ceiling flat instead of slowly curving downward like a hammock under its own weight. When a crew uses standard wall board on a ceiling to save money or time, nothing happens immediately. The ceiling goes up, it gets taped, it gets painted. It looks identical to a correctly installed ceiling, but underneath that paint, gravity has already started its slow, invisible pull. Most homeowners never notice this until months, sometimes years later, when they start to see faint waves in the surface, especially under certain lighting angles at night. Now picture two identical bedrooms side by side. In one, the ceiling was hung with the correct thickness of board, fastened every 12 inches along the framing, exactly where it's supposed to be. In the other, the crew stretched their fastening pattern to save time, placing screws farther apart than they should have. From the floor, both ceilings look the same on installation day. But in the first bedroom, the ceiling stays flat for decades. In the second, the panels begin to pull loose from the framing above, millimeter by millimeter, completely invisible from below. This is where the real danger hides. A ceiling doesn't need to fully collapse to become a serious problem. Long before that dramatic moment, smaller warning signs start to appear, and almost nobody knows how to read them. A faint crack forming along a seam, a slightly visible screw pattern showing through the paint, sometimes called nail pops or screw pops, where the fastener slowly works itself loose from the wood or metal framing above. Most people paint right over it and move on with their lives, assuming it's cosmetic. But the biggest mistake hadn't even happened yet. Behind that smooth painted surface, moisture plays its own quiet role in this story. Bathrooms, kitchens, and laundry rooms produce warm, humid air that naturally rises and presses against the ceiling above. If that ceiling was installed using ordinary drywall instead of a moisture-resistant type, the paper facing on the board slowly absorbs that humidity every single day. Over time, the paper weakens. The screws that once held the board firmly against the framing start to lose their grip, not because the screws failed, but because the material around them softened. This hidden detail changes everything, because it means a ceiling can be doomed from the very first humid season it experiences, long before anyone notices a single visible sign. Picture a laundry room ceiling that looks perfectly normal for 2 full years. Then one afternoon, after a long hot shower down the hall and a dryer running non-stop, a homeowner notices the paint above the washer looks slightly discolored, almost yellowed, in a shape like a spreading cloud. That stain isn't just cosmetic, it's the visible signature of moisture that has been silently traveling through the ceiling for months, softening the drywall from the inside out, completely undetectable until the surface finally tells on itself. What happened next surprised even experienced builders. Instead of stopping to investigate the stain, many homeowners simply repaint over it, assuming a fresh coat solves the problem. It doesn't. It hides it. And hiding a moisture problem inside a ceiling is one of the most costly decisions a homeowner can unknowingly make. Because mold doesn't need much time or much darkness to establish itself once conditions are right. Now the story takes a turn most people never expect. As moisture keeps working through the weakened board, it doesn't just threaten the drywall. It threatens the wood or metal framing above it, the very skeleton holding the ceiling in place. Softened framing loses its ability to hold fasteners securely. Compromised drywall loses its structural integrity, and now you have 2 failing systems stacked directly above the rooms where people sleep, cook, and relax every day. This is the part almost nobody notices until it's already a crisis. A ceiling doesn't collapse the moment it becomes weak. It collapses when something finally tips the balance. Extra weight from stored items in an attic above, a heavy rainstorm that adds humidity, or simply time finally catching up to years of quiet deterioration. And when it does happen, it rarely happens gently. It happens suddenly, without warning, often when someone is standing directly underneath. Let's slow down and picture what correct installation actually looks like, because comparing the two side by side is where the real lesson lives. A professional crew begins by choosing the right board for the job every single time. Thicker fire and sag-resistant drywall for open ceiling spans, moisture-resistant board for bathrooms and laundry areas, and properly rated board wherever fire separation matters, like ceilings below an attached garage. That single decision, made before a single screw goes in, determines whether that ceiling will last for decades or start failing within a few short years. Next comes the framing layout itself. Professional installers follow strict spacing rules for how far apart the ceiling joists or trusses can be before the drywall needs extra support, sometimes requiring additional blocking to prevent sagging between framing members. Cutting corners here is invisible on installation day and devastating 5 years later. Then comes fastening, arguably the most underestimated step in the entire process. Ceiling drywall needs more screws, spaced closer together than wall drywall, specifically because it's fighting gravity instead of simply standing upright. Professionals follow a precise, tight fastening pattern along every framing member, driving each screw to just the right depth, deep enough to sit slightly below the surface for a smooth finish, but not so deep that it tears through the paper and loses its grip entirely. That balance, invisible to anyone standing in the finished room, is the difference between a ceiling that holds firm for 30 years and one that quietly begins failing before the first decade is over. Now here's where another critical mistake almost nobody notices. Even with the right board and the right fasteners, an entire ceiling can still fail if the seams between panels aren't taped and finished correctly. Skilled installers use multiple thin, carefully feathered layers of joint compound over paper or mesh tape, allowing each layer to dry fully before adding the next. Rushed installations skip this patience entirely, slapping on a single thick layer that looks fine the day it's painted, but cracks and separates as the house naturally shifts and settles with the seasons. Those cracks aren't just cosmetic annoyances. They're often the very first visible clue that something underneath has already started to move. At first, it doesn't seem like a serious problem. A hairline crack along a ceiling seam looks like something any homeowner might expect in an older house. But when that crack keeps returning after being patched, again and again, it's not decoration failing. It's often a sign that the board itself isn't properly secured, and no amount of caulk or paint fixes a structural problem hiding in the framing above. There's another factor almost nobody thinks about until it's explained clearly, and that's weight distribution from above. Attics loaded with heavy storage boxes, holiday decorations, or old furniture place direct downward pressure on the ceiling framing beneath them. A ceiling engineered correctly can typically handle its intended load without issue, but a ceiling already weakened by moisture, undersized board, or poor fastening has almost no reserve strength left to absorb that additional weight. It becomes less a question of if it will fail, and more a question of when. Picture an attic space slowly filling over the years with storage bins. Then imagine the ceiling below it in a child's bedroom. The same ceiling that was rushed during installation to hit a deadline years earlier. Every additional box placed in that attic adds silent stress to a system that was already living on borrowed time. This is exactly how catastrophic ceiling failures happen in homes that looked completely normal right up until the moment they didn't. Now raise the stakes even further, because there's one more hidden danger tied directly to ceilings that most homeowners have never even considered: fire separation. In many homes, the ceiling beneath an attached garage isn't just holding up drywall. It's serving as a critical fire and smoke barrier between the garage and the living space above or beside it. Using the wrong type of drywall there, or skipping proper taping and sealing around penetrations like light fixtures or vents, doesn't just risk a sagging ceiling, it risks removing a critical layer of protection during the exact kind of emergency where minutes matter most. This is why inspectors specifically check ceiling assemblies in garages, because a beautiful, freshly painted ceiling can be quietly failing at its most important job, and nobody would ever know just by looking at it. So how does a homeowner actually catch these problems before they become disasters? Professionals look for very specific warning signs, and now you know exactly what they are too. Faint waves or dips across an otherwise flat ceiling, especially visible under angled lighting at night. Small cracks that keep returning to the same spot, no matter how many times they're patched. Slight yellow or brown discoloration that spreads slowly rather than appearing all at once. A soft, spongy feeling if you gently press on the surface near a suspicious stain. Visible screw or nail patterns showing faintly through paint, especially in humid rooms like bathrooms and laundry areas. Catching these clues early transforms a potential 5-figure repair into a simple, affordable fix. A section of compromised drywall can often be cut out and replaced long before the framing above it suffers any real damage, but only if the problem is caught while it's still small. Prevention, as it turns out, was never complicated. It simply required patience and the right materials from the very beginning, choosing properly rated board for every specific room and ceiling span, following correct fastening spacing without cutting corners to save an afternoon. allowing joint compound the time it needs to cure properly between coats, and controlling humidity in bathrooms and laundry rooms with functioning ventilation instead of hoping the drywall handles it alone. None of these solutions require exotic materials or expensive upgrades. They require doing the ordinary steps correctly, every single time, even when nobody is watching, and even when a deadline is pushing a crew to move faster than they should. What began as an invisible shortcut, a slightly thinner board here, a few missing screws there, a rushed coat of joint compound applied without patience, slowly built into a hidden structural weakness capable of collapsing an entire section of ceiling without a single warning sign visible from the room below. That's the quiet, expensive lesson hiding above millions of homes right now. A ceiling that looks flawless can still be failing, one invisible mistake at a time, long before anyone standing underneath it ever finds out. If this pulled back the curtain on something you'll never look at the same way again, stick around, because next time we're heading somewhere else in the house, where a small, overlooked decision quietly turns into a very expensive problem, and you'll want to see exactly how it happens before it happens to you.